Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us. We are, as always, doing the latest and greatest in emerging tech and immersive experiences at the Immergence Show. I'm Nico Farah, your host, and Noreen Sullivan is my co-host. How are you doing today, Noreen?
Doing great. Excited to talk about some interesting topics and news, and just to everything that's going on in the tech scene. That last week we talked about the need for social responsibility, and this week we're going to do a deeper dive into some of the regulations and relate them to current news. So that's exciting.
Yes. So we heard about, or you told me, you brought it to my attention that Elon Musk just launched his AI platform, Grok, which comes from a sci-fi concept. Is that right, Noreen?
Yeah, so Grok was the computer in the book and subsequent films, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And what the Earth and some of these other things were answering, what is the meaning of the life, universe, and everything. And so the computer generated, so it's the assumption that we're living in a simulation kind of thing. So it generated all the life in the universe and everything in order to answer that question. The answer, if you've seen the show, is 42, which nobody understood. But in early programming code, 42 means anything you want. So it's just a really fun book. If you haven't read it or seen the movie, go out and do that. So, but that Grok, and then Grok became a synonym for understanding, like, oh, I Grok that, in kind of the geek speak, tech chic world. And so he's adopted this sarcastic kind of, attitude in the AI simulation. I haven't tried it. It's only for verified paid Twitter or X users at this point, and I have a problem with paying for verification. I think verification should happen a different way if you're going to verify. So I haven't had access to it. Maybe it will be opened up to more people, but I'm very curious about its response.
Yeah, I watched a video of a user kind of reviewing several responses of it. It was interesting how it's a different take of LLMs, where the tone of the chatbot is kind of witty and humorous and sarcastic. And I would think you would like it, Noreen. And it was, like different questions, kind of trying to avoid answering harmful questions, but in a funny way. It wasn't afraid to, say curse words or anything like that. And what's interesting is that Elon was the person who was saying bad things about AI and scaring everybody about it. Now he wants to use AI to benefit humanity, and saying that this is going to be better, faster, stronger than ChatGPT and other LLMs. So that's an interesting situation. And the other thing that was interesting about it was that he's combining it with Tesla and saying that, basically when the cars, the self-driving cars are not necessarily working for their owner or doing the taxi type of job, then the rest can be used for the inference part of the AI. So that's interesting. So
I don't understand what that means.
So I think capturing the data, so using the cars to capture more data, and kind of using their processing power for helping this LLM. That's how he wants to kind of like use resources that already are sitting somewhere and kind of benefit the consumers of his other company. And so that's how he thinks. And then the other benefit of kind of doing this AI Grok, which becomes also like an X.ai type of situation. So any premium user of X can access it as well. And so that kind of promotes and incentivizes people to want to buy the premium account, which there was not much incentive before. And then the person that was describing this was saying that this can easily bring him $1 billion annual revenue based on the growth of ChatGPT. So they're basically trying to use this to better what they already been doing in different companies. And so, he also really thinks that this is another form of helping the humanity, and with the free speech conversation that he has had. So, we talked about social responsibility and some of the instances that has happened recently. So I was thinking of going deeper a little bit about the regulations. The reason I think the regulations should exist is because there are several groups in the society that don't necessarily have the means or ability to protect themselves under different circumstances, protect from harm or offense or other situations. So that's where there is government, and there are type of punishment processes in place to kind of manage the society. And when you are producing a product, you also have some responsibility, whether it's a hardware or software. You need to design for safety. So that's my perspective of why these regulations are important, but obviously to some degree. And as we go discuss through these, you can see that some of the regulations are questionable. They're not perfect. And it's really hard to have a perfect regulation because you have to think of several groups, several kind of perspectives and situations, and to cover as many as you can. So it is a hard job to define regulations, but it is something that keeps the society in place to some good extent. Now, this concept of free speech is interesting. The origin of it was from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And so this is a non-binding agreement that kind of countries came together in UN and defined it. And free speech is basically one of the many of basic human needs. And again, it's non-binding. So the individual country regulations came after that. In the US, it was the First Amendment, which is more focused around, kind of like not specifying the religion or prohibiting free exercise of religion, and freedom of speech, freedom of press, and the right of people to petition or assemble the government. So it's more towards the government and more towards like these different concepts. It doesn't necessarily talk
actually,
about...
it started way earlier than that in the 5th century in Athens, Greece. The principles emerged in order to create what was the first kind of democracy, right? So in order to have a democracy, people had to be able to say what they thought and have, debate and everything. So it predates modern international human rights instruments for thousands of years. So
yeah, I did read the history, but I wanted to kind of shortcut to the most recent. But yes, and it was very interesting to read the history because none of these changes actually happened like overnight. Like it wasn't like, ta-da, we have free speech and everybody's okay with it. It actually took several generations, as you said, and it was like little by little that people really worked together to make this happen. And many people got sacrificed and, did so much to get to this, similar to other rights that we have, like support for LGBTQ and other ones. So it is kind of changing the world to be a better place, and it took many, many years. But most recent things that happened is that it was in the UN, and then each country, not every country, some countries do not really believe in it as much.
That's a little bit inaccurate because the UN didn't form until after 1942, after World War II. And the First Amendment happened in the Constitution in about 300 years before that, or like 150 years before that. So it existed in the United States, and it also existed in England, but they, so then, yes, it began to, it's kind of the other way around. It began to be adopted through the spread of democracy and the UN's policy supporting.
Yeah, thank you for correcting me. Yeah, that's helpful to know. And it's not a limitless type of, agreement or law. It has limits to, like, not having hate speech or copyright infringement or non-disclosure agreements, stuff like that. They're not necessarily included into this concept of free speech. Especially there are these harm and offense principles. So when it gets to these levels, then it's not free speech, and it has to be kind of analyzed, and there is going to be liability. And the other interesting thing was that originally they thought the main threat to free speech is censorship, but that was when the information was scarce. Because they thought, if you just have more information, you're going to be able to discern and, know what is better. But with the arrival of internet, it has changed. Now, it's so easy to fake information. It's so easy to have too much information personalized, attacking you. And trolling and scamming and all those things are now possible, which has changed kind of the threat to free speech. Now it's more about misinformation and disinformation, and less about like the censorship being the main problem, because of even AI being one of the ways that we're seeing a lot of misinformation and disinformation, which kind of going back to that platform X wants to protect free speech, but at the same time, there's so much misinformation and disinformation on it. So then how is this being managed? Who is liable for that? And so there is another regulation, which is Section 230, which is interesting. And it's basically kind of removing the liability of the platforms from, the kind of good or bad of the content that users are creating. On the positive side, they say Section 230 was the 26th word that made the internet, because it basically removed the liability, it removed the fear from the website and platform creators. And in that sense, it allowed to have a lot of innovation, all these advanced search engines, social media, video streaming, cloud computing, all these things came to existence because they could just break things and build the stuff. And the challenge is that, there not all the information are being necessarily moderated, and also, like, again, not every user can discern what is truth, what is not, what is misinformation, what is disinformation, again, with all this information that can all look real. So there are exceptions into what doesn't fall into Section 230, like copyright infringement. There was another act which was around sex trafficking. So in those cases, they have tried to like update this section and try to moderate and manage how platforms are looking at this. But this was shaped, this Section 230 was drafted when the internet was very early. And the platforms, the best they could do was like probably some manual moderation. And, they basically did the best they could. But now with this, explosion of AI and all the technology that we have, I personally think is the time to kind of put more responsibility, like we talked about social responsibility, put more responsibility on the platforms to do their best to moderate and make sure that the harmful aspect or copyright infringement or all these other issues are taken down and flagged and removed. And so all of this needs to be kind of reconsidered, and that's very interesting. That was what originally needed to do innovation to some extent, but now that we have the tools to kind of be more responsible, now is the time to kind of revisit it. And actually, President had an executive order a couple years ago, or 2-3 years ago, that was about reforming the Section 230. And one aspect of it was about this moderation practices that are kind of unclear and inconsistent. And the other part was about how this harmful content are not necessarily being escalated. And so they're looking into potentially making some modifications into it, which could be interesting. So yeah, that's kind of the concept of the liabilities on the different platforms. Now there are more specific liabilities around children, for example. Like if you are a platform that is creating content for children under 13, or whether or not you're really knowing, like you're asking for their ID validation or age verification, but there are other measures to assess if your content is used for children. If that's happening, then there is a need for parental consent. There is a need for providing the information that is being used and who is being sold to and stuff like that. And that's another aspect where they're trying to protect minors and children for that. Now, again, there are some challenges with that. On one hand, when it was drafted, they felt like parents are more concerned and they probably care more about the safety of their children. So that's how it should be. But at the same time, the parents are getting busier and busier and technology is moving faster and faster. That sometimes, or many times, we see that children are even picking up on technology sooner and faster than their parents. So when asking for parental consent, you're putting the children in a tough situation that now they have to educate their parents, or whether or not the parents at all uses these platforms or this specific platform. So some people are complaining that this is actually putting the children in a position to either decide to lie about their age or the consent, or just decide not to use the technology. which, like Mark Zuckerberg mentioned a few years ago, that's, I believe that education is to start from very early on. And this law is preventing that from happening. So I'm not saying that Mark is necessarily right on that front, but these are just different perspectives that we're sharing, that, people have different opinions. Some complain that this is too much on putting the expectations and responsibilities on the parents. It should be more on the platform. And the challenges with the consent and
if you're the parent, you need to know what your kid is doing and whether you want them on that platform or not.
Well, that's what I'm saying, that some of the complaints are that is not necessarily applicable to all parents. A lot of parents may not be tech savvy, or may not necessarily go to a children platform, or they're just, giving the space to their children to, learn technology and grow. And they don't necessarily going to check every single thing that they're doing. I'm not saying good or bad, but that's just the reality of the world we're living in. Parents are busy and they want the children to, be busy too. And they choose a platform that's maybe, or they allow the children to follow a platform that their friends are using, or their school has recommended, or whatever. But now putting all the responsibility on the parents, that every single thing needs to be with the consent, that might be too much. So that's one of the kind of controversies around this law. But yeah, it is an interesting law. And then the other complaint is about how this is in suppression of children's rights to freedom of speech. And so we just talked about freedom of speech now, and also privacy of the children. There's some complaint that this is kind of like, asking for age is against their privacy. So again, creating a regulation is kind of tricky, but at the same time, I think on the positive side, it should push the platforms to be more mindful of, communicating at least to the parents, and to some level of providing more information of like what we do with the data, even if it's the metadata, what's going to happen to it. And this all originated when there was a platform called KidCom, I believe. Noreen, did you know about that?
I'm sorry, what?
Have you heard of the platform KidCom?
No.
So this all originated when that platform came around, which was actually a metaverse, an early metaverse. And they were doing that only for children. And at the time, there was no law. There was no regulation around it. And they were not really doing anything wrong. That's also very interesting. When they actually drafted the law and they went back to this company, they actually worked it out with them to make the consent happen, make everything working. But it was one of the best platforms, actually, that was very educational, informational, and supportive for children, and nothing wrong with it. So it's interesting, again, where the origination of different laws are. But yeah, so that's on the children's side. And there's a penalty that is not designed based on the revenue of the company who is violating. It is just $40,000 per violation, which again, some people complain that this is, especially catastrophic for small businesses. Because if Meta makes the same mistake, then it's really nothing for them. So it's not a portion of their revenue, it's just a very fixed fee. Now there is another one about California residents. Do you know about that one, Noreen? The California privacy law that exists. It is about like informing the residents of California that their information is being used and they're disclosing.
Yes, I do know that one. Yes, they have to. There has to be somewhere where you can find who has what. So it's more of a freedom of information kind of thing for the state rather than, so you have to be able to find who, if your data is being sold, who is it being sold to and why and what. So.
And they should not discriminate you if you decide not to sell your data. And they also have a part about children and minors in that law. So again, there are different jurisdictions and different kind of states, countries. They all have tried to like incorporate different laws. Noreen, tell us about this SBF kind of judging situation, and also like what are the regulations around that, like with FCC and so on.
Well, they also the you know the Sam Bankman-Fried was convicted, you know, and of false deceptive practices under the FTC Trade Commission Act, which has you know, been updated several times to meet with the internet standards. So he had created a cryptocurrency. Everybody thought that he was a guy who was building for good. He had but it was basically fraud. So we have the ability to, as tech leaders, to kind of decide, you know, not to be fraudulent and not to, because it, you know, like especially in Web3, it attracted, the anonymity attracted so many scammers and harmful folks that it just was crazy, and it's going to take a lot to rebuild trust.
Well, he wasn't even anonymous and did all of this.
Yeah, he did it not even anonymously, but a lot of people do it anonymously, you know, and it's just like, because it seemed like a Wild West and you could do whatever you wanted, that, you know, just scamming people and taking their money, you know. And there have been unfair trade practices for many, many years, like back to the railroad days, and when the, you know, and when people were doing insider trading, and, you know, before the market crash, and, you know, in the 1920s, you know, that was 100 years ago, that we were sort of, as a society, going through a similar thing with the manufacturing process and, you know, the railroads and the big utilities. So there became monopolies that controlled, and certain people had power and they weren't regulated. And, you know, I believe in limited regulation. You know, I don't, you know, because you know, taking away the liability to the companies allows for innovation, you know, and I don't want innovation to be squashed, but a lot of people with these, you know, scams, you know, can put it out there. Even the Thanos scam, like there's a lot of these people that raise a lot of money in the tech field, and it's just entirely, you know, a house of cards. It's, you know, it's not real. And I'm not sure how people think that they can get away with that. I mean, those are crimes, and, you know, and as tech leaders, we need to do better and build better.
What was the regulation that would kind of prevent them from doing this? Like, what was going on?
So it's the Safe Web Act, and you know, it's of 2006. So it says that you can't, you know, you can't do across the border, because what happens is those cryptocurrencies would be in other countries, you know, and so they wouldn't be responsible for FCC, you know, many of these regulations. But it says, so it takes away the deception, you know, from being in other countries, but it was just really outright fraud that this was worth this much money, and so that's what happened there. So they were trying to understand recognize the global nature of these problems, because it is very hard to keep track.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think lack of regulation, because again, I agree that the technology and innovation moves fast, and it's hard for government to move as fast. So they're just doing their best, and it's not always going to be the best thing that they do in the beginning. So SEC tried to regulate, but it was just, kind of picking on some, not the others. And we saw different occasions of that. Like even when we were establishing our DAO, we were told that, hey, that will flag it to SEC. So like there's so many different things.
And some of the things that are interesting is the things that are in place to protect people, like the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, which was the first act that regulates like your email and your social media and stuff. That came in the 80s, even way, when like Mark Zuckerberg was in kindergarten, so they're trying, and the Video Privacy Protection Act, which came in from people being on videos that were being distributed like in cassette tapes or VHS tapes, and how it would say it's a crime to copy this, or so there was copyright and people's identity being shared, and now they're trying to update some of those things, because anybody who has a website, if you have someone's picture on it and you don't have their consent, or they're in a video, then that shouldn't be able to be distributed. And so now, because of streaming, like we're streaming now, that you have to have consent. And so, and that act is, they're talking about updating that. The conversation started in October of this year. So some of the things that are in place to be protections are things that have existed, for a long time, but things have indeed changed quite a bit, and protecting, your content, your image, your identity, is loosely covered. But it was just recently as October that a judge said, no, it's not just for VHS tapes anymore, and they're going to that act would cover streaming and things like that. So
these regulations are going slow, and they're not necessarily going as fast as the technology is. And even with AI, we saw how like even government tried to do an executive order in the US, and everybody is doing their best to kind of catch up, but technology moves faster.
But it's also fear mongering. I mean, you talk about disinformation and misinformation. I mean, a lot of the privacy concerns, are based on, selling data, but then the platform's free. So if the platform's free, they have to make money somehow, and they use the data to do advertising. And that's the same model as TV, or the same model that's newspapers and has existed for a long time, that the advertising model, where you're building an audience, and the audience is getting the benefit of the entertainment or the interaction, and then the ad rates are based on who watches it and that kind of data and what their behavior is. And people, yes, they are spending more and more time on these different kinds of platforms and sharing more and more of themselves. And then they're like, they're afraid of AI, like, oh, we should slow down AI. We should, shut down and moderate and moderate and moderate. And in some way, I do understand what you're saying, that we need to be cognizant that people might not be able to differentiate what's real and what isn't, or or have some responsibility. But I do think that the consumer really needs to understand what they're doing, what they're buying, how they're participating on these platforms, and for their children. I think that
that's where the education comes in, and we talked about digital literacy and education being one of the social responsibilities of these platforms. When they innovate so fast, they also need to bring people with them, and they usually miss out on that. Even with the metaverse, they designed it for the crypto people. They really dropped the ball on educating the other consumers. Same thing with crypto, same thing with other technologies, even with AI. Not everybody knows how to use ChatGPT, even now. So how are they going to differentiate what is fake, what is not, when it's so believable, when it's so realistic? So one of the items that was in Biden's executive order was like having watermarks into these deep fake videos, or any type of AI generated video, because the speed of gathering the masses and keeping up with the technology is really not the same for everybody. So you and I might be on the early adopter side and know the technology, but majority of the society are not moving as fast. And so that's where the regulations will come in. And one of the challenges that we saw, all those difficulties in the crypto space, was lack of regulations, because they just focused on making more money, and by any means, and fooling people, doing fraud. I was part of different communities, and I saw how it was so challenging, that there is nothing to be afraid of, and they can do anything. And so that's when you see the true face of people, when there is nothing to be scared of, and they can be anonymous, and they can do whatever they want. So as much as I love innovation, I think there should be some level of regulations for the masses.
So how would you do it better?
Well, I think it comes with the education and digital literacy of our audience and users and partners and all those people, to bring them with us as we're building. So that's why we're doing this show, because when everything is built and done, it's really hard to go back. And that's why a lot of these platforms, they just choose to just pay the fee, pay the penalty, or go around it, or negotiate it, or all those things, because it's really hard to go back. They're never designing for safety. They're not designing for privacy. They're not designing for good. They're designing for money. And that's what's widely accepted here. Now, what I believe is that you can do good by doing well, and helping people and following the right directions. Now, everybody might have a different value system, and that's fine. But as long as you communicate it, you attract the people that have similar values. So like with what you mentioned, the ads and data privacy, I feel like a lot of people were not communicated with. Like, this is why your data is being used, because you're using Facebook for free.
And a lot of these platforms, YouTube is more transparent in some ways, because they run the ad and you watch the show, and then at a certain point you can skip it, but you have to watch at least 5 seconds of it, and so that is more familiar, because people are more used to that. Like, oh, I watch TV and then there's ads, and now there's Netflix, so then you can pay, and not to have ads, or you can have ads and their ads are going to be targeted at you. It's sort of when people can't, even though it says sponsored in tiny writing or something, it's when the lines get blurred and they don't understand that this is an ad and it is an exchange, that
that's confusing, that's misleading. Yes,
it's not as clear. But for the misinformation side, I mean, YouTube's algorithm was serving more conspiracy theories because they got greater traction. And so, and they got called out on that.
We talked about it last week. We said that if you engage more of those emotions in people, make them more angry, make them more frustrated, then you're gonna see them engaging more, writing comments. Like, I hardly write comments unless I'm really mad. So similarly, that's how they want your engagement, and the more engagement, they can sell more ads. So that's why I have fundamental problem with the way these algorithms are designed right now, because they're only measuring your kind of engagement. There are some platforms that are slowly looking at, is it a positive engagement or is it a negative engagement? And that's what we're also looking at. It has to be differentiated. It has to be more than that. And my biggest argument with social responsibility of the platforms is because they're really good at adopting technology. Everybody suddenly adopted all the chatbots. There's almost no serious consumer tech company that doesn't use any LLMs. So why can't we also use AI for good? Why can't they use it on moderation? Why can't they use it to protect their consumers, to provide more education, to provide more support? We're still seeing similar problems. So they choose to ignore these other parts and just use it for generating more profit. And that's where I think there's room to do better. And that's what we're hoping to accomplish, because I think it's too late to do it after everything is done. And you have to bring people with you. You have to communicate constantly. Otherwise, that's not ideal. Otherwise, you're just taking advantage of them and they feel left out. That's why people are fighting to not sell their data, because they think something is taken away from them without any return. But if you inform them, if you educate them and give them the value that they need, like personalization can be really helpful. If you're getting ads and information about the products that you actually need and want, that saves you so much time and energy. That's the convenience. I love personalization as a user. But personalization comes from AI that has gathered your data to understand what you need. So if people say, no, don't use my data, oh, but I want the convenience, these two things don't go together. So people need to be informed and educated that if you want the convenience, and that's why you use the technology and these platforms, then you should be okay with some level of giving up on your data, which, as you always argue, Noreen, that one person's data doesn't really change anything. Aggregated data,
right? It has to be the large model. It has to be to have dramatic impact. You have to have a trend analysis. I alone do not make a trend, but if 100 people or 1,000 people or 1,000,000 people do something, then that starts to be a trend, and then you can use that, or if people are buying this area of stuff, or and to personalize it for you, for what you want. So behavioral targeting based on large amounts of computer data, and the create and also in AI, and creating chatbots that interact with potential consumers, to have that convenience. It's impossible to do it without having the general data. Now you can protect, like, you don't have to say their actual name. You can say this person is this years old and this person lives in this state, and that, you know, so there, you know, there's the metadata. And so, but there's also the idea that people get discriminated against based on their data, you know, when it comes to like race or religion or things like that too. You know, if that goes to a health or health, like going to an insurance company and they choose not to insure you based on this data. So I understand that there are reasons to regulate. People have to make that choice, you know, and like you make fun of me that I do read terms and conditions, and you know, whether
I don't make fun of you. I'm just saying that's something that most people don't do. So that doesn't mean that it's a bad thing.
You know, it's just because like I kind of, you know, and you can scan it really easily, but to, you know, to understand the exact exchange you're making. And yeah, and terms and conditions are boring. Maybe there would be a better way to do it and say, okay, hey guys, you know, this is the data we collect. This is what we use it for. This is
why we're doing it. Similar to like, you know,
you know, to make it more comfortable and you know, but there are also regulations that say if you choose to opt out, we can't discriminate against you, which is fine, but you may not have the same experience as someone else where we have more information.
Yeah, I want to double click on your comment about discrimination. The reason discrimination happens goes back to the biases. Everybody by default has biases. And when they are designing a platform or technology, they are going to incorporate some of those biases, good or bad, into that. So now if there is no regulation, it's really hard to avoid it, to avoid these biases to impact the masses. So like this discrimination of age, gender, race, all those things, it's something that platforms are used to it because of their biases of the builders, but there has to be some sort of regulation stopping it. Otherwise, self-regulation, which comes from the platform, hardly happens. Now we're trying to do something different and be more kind of accountable and self-regulated, but in most platforms that's not happening. So to avoid bias, again, that's why the regulations should exist to some extent, and remove these discriminations, remove this type of challenges that come with any technology. But yeah, so
there's also the laws around the American with Disabilities Act, where, you know, to allow people to have the same access. You know, even there's some tech around Instagram describing the photos, or like so how can people with disabilities access, or you know, for hearing impaired, putting on subtitles. But what in researching, looking at those regulations, and there is a whole new field of, especially with AI and everything, that is disability tech, which I didn't know that what do they call it? Well, there's one company called Hope Tech, and it's just really interesting that they're disability innovation. So you know, a lot of the robotic arms and a lot of the AI powered things that are really making a big difference, and it's a huge market worldwide. So, you know, considering how you can help people can be a value add.
And that's another level of thinking about the biases again. If the builders are all, you know, in good physical and mental condition, they would probably never think of considering disabled folks or different abilities on the mental side. So what will motivate them to do better and include more audiences into their design? Like, we complain about the VR headsets being problematic and causing nausea, especially in women, again, because it was not designed with women, and now we're seeing the consequences. I read it also wasn't designed originally with disabled, people who can't walk. And so in all those cases, that's, again, there needs to be some sort of regulation or push coming to motivate or incentivize people to design also for inclusion of
but
all.
also market demand. I mean, that's, the disability market worldwide is larger than the market of China. It's gigantic, so that if there's money to be made, then this disability innovation becomes interesting. I know that we're saying don't chase the money as much, but people choose with their dollars, right? They choose.
Well, people have different motivation and incentives, and I'm not saying don't chase the money. I'm saying money shouldn't be the only thing that you think about as a builder, or at least that's how we believe in. Now, even in the consideration of children or other audiences that care about safety, a lot of these platforms, they just chose not to consider it, not to design for it, because it wasn't easy for them. That wasn't like, usually builders build for themselves. That's why most of the games are about shooting and all those things, because that's what they personally enjoy. Now, there are a huge market of women wanting to play games too, but very few of them are actually builders. So now slowly we're seeing, like, I saw the CEO of Xbox is now a Black woman, just recently announced. So there is a change happening, positive change is happening, but it's going very slow. And I agree with you that ideally we shouldn't need regulations, but until the change is fully incorporated in our society and people are more open-minded and prioritizing other things and not just money, I mean, again, missing out on women and children and all these other sources of income, it doesn't even have justified business mindset. It's more coming from their biases, subconscious biases even. So that's where you want other incentives to guide you to the right direction. Now, we're trying to design it from the beginning to be something more inclusive, and not just saying it, we're actually doing it. Us being the founders, being women, being from different generations, different backgrounds, and being constantly mindful of who we hire, who we work with, who we are building for, and reading through what's the demand from the society and talking to people. Like, these are what we truly believe as our responsibility, that will lead to hopefully a happier world, that will be less complaint and less legal lawsuits and all those things that we're seeing now happening. Why people are calling social media toxic? Does it have to be toxic? Is this the only way social media should perform? Is there no other way we can have people get connected and socialize and do virtual gatherings and be safe?
Well, there's a lot. There is, like, certain platforms are more toxic than other platforms, and certain groups are more toxic than other groups. And I still think there's a lot of good and a lot of good connections that are made digitally that couldn't have been made in any other way,
But there is a huge room for improvement. And that's what I'm personally motivated to fill in that gap, because I think it takes a certain kind of background and expertise and beliefs that would motivate you to want to do that. And I don't expect the current leaders to be caring about these topics as much as we do. So that's where I think, this is the area that we're very excited about. And that's why we're doing this show, because we want to educate and empower others with us. So if you guys are building in this world and doing online platforms, metaverse, social media, emerging tech, all these areas, we think these are the information that you might be interested in too. And if there are other topics that you want us to talk about, or if you want to join us in these conversations, please DM us or comment on our post, and we'll be in touch. But yeah, this is our show for this week. Noreen, do you have any closing comments?
Well, I wrote a blog about social responsibility and these convictions, and I put in it that, maybe these tech leaders could start to have a pledge to be more socially responsible. Maybe I'll put that out there as a separate post and see how many people want to take a pledge to do better. I really do believe that we can regulate ourselves, and that that doing better is a way to make more money by getting to mass adoption, by addressing the needs and wants of, just the audiences that haven't been served as well. And it can be done in a different way. So hopefully, we'll hear from some people who are aligned, and we'll see what happens with that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We will be back next Tuesday at 2 p.m. EST with the Immergence Show. And looking forward to connecting with you all. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye.